Majora's Mask, Chapter 59. The Graveyard. Previously. A lone skull child in a fierce winter storm screamed as he threw away his mask.
No!
Majora's mask plopped into the snow, and the skull kid ran aimlessly through the blizzard. The demon's relic lay abandoned just beside a sheer cliff. Snowhead's distant peaks were obscured by the onslaught of snow. Then, fingers black as night shot out from the abyss. They grabbed the cliff's edge, and Dark Link pulled itself onto the landscape beside Majora. The shadow, dazed by the sudden loss of the light magic in its body, soon found its master lying in the snow. Dark Link reverently picked up the mask and made to place the dark magic over its face.
No.
The shadow paused. Majora had spoken. The voice was in its mind, yes, but it had spoken. Before now, the Skull Kid had filtered each of the demon's commands. Majora reminded Dark Link of its worthiness as a servant, revealing its intentions to force a confrontation between Link and the Skull Kid.
When the imp returns,
Majora said,
I will lead him to the boy, so that the hero can dispose of him. Then, you will kill the boy. Once they are both dead, you will find me again and become the new bearer of the mask. And together, we will finally break Termina's shackles and realize our potential in the worlds beyond.
The shadow asked only one question. I could kill the imp myself when he returns to grab the mask. There is no reason to give the boy that pleasure.
No. Let the boy kill him. Let the boy think he has won. Wait, watch, follow, and listen. You are still tethered to the cycles and will go back in time with the rest of us. The imp is not to know you survived, and neither is the boy. But once the imp is dead, you will continue in his place as my assassin, and will have earned the right to possess my power.
The shadow tightens its fingers around the edges of the mask. Finally, it had proven worthy.
The imp was never your master. I am your master. You must no longer refer to him as such.
I never followed an order from the imp, the shadow said. I only obey you. Darklink waited for Majora to say more, but the demon never did. It then walked to the mountain wall to lay Majora back in the snow where the Skull Kid had thrown it. That way, the imp would never know it had been picked up.
Wait.
Darklink stopped an inch from placing the mask down.
Killing the boy will remain your priority, but I have another task for you. I may no longer be able to rely on the moon to free me from this realm, as it proved incapable when it fell. You will need an item that the masked man left behind to aid you in this quest.
Dark Link waited for Majora to elaborate, gripping the mask as the cold air swirled around them.
There's a tree that acts as the center of all light magic in existence, and it is what binds me here. Laying waste to all of Termina did not destroy it, which means its location remains the greatest mystery of all. While you must continue watching the boy and the imp, you must also seek a way to discover where this tree is hidden, because you will find it, and you will burn it to the ground.
The present. Do you think he'll be done with it by now? Link asked.
Well, he better be, or else we'll be getting our rupees back.
Tuttle flew to the door as Link fastened his boots. He was no longer covered in blood, dried salt water, or pink monster goop, all of which had taken him several hours to remedy. His gilded sword and Hylian shield were secured to his back, along with the heavy bag around his shoulder. The Ocarina of Time was on his belt, and his green tunic had been freshly washed. Sunlight came in through the knife chamber's window, pouring into the small room. From inside, the day ahead of them seemed warm, jovial, and filled with opportunity. However, an earthquake rocked the inn and soon shattered that illusion. Tattle and I need to leave this cycle behind, Link thought. Clocktown's quarantine had thrown everything off the final day's schedule. People normally long gone still lingered in the streets, and he imagined they would only just now be fleeing. Hopefully my merchant keeps his word and stays behind. Link hopped off his bed. The masks and glass bottles in his bag clinked against the hookshot and arrow tips. I practically doubled the number of masks I own, he thought. While he hadn't taken the mask salesman's ring, he had saved the Mask of Truth, Stone Mask, and All-Night Mask. Evan's mask, though, he'd let drift down the waterway. Another body to bury, another life lost. He had no need for a second Zora one, and he certainly didn't need the extra weight. One other item had joined his collection too, a shard of wood. Link didn't dare use it before he was finished in Termina, as he didn't know if the piano would let him come back to Termina. As he discovered through another, leaving Termina was much simpler than coming. This realm's rules and magic tricks made sure of that.
Did you go through our checklist of all of our things?
Tattle asked, twinkling alongside him as they left the room.
You didn't leave anything behind?
I've got everything.
And how about the bottle?
Link stopped, a breath away from leaving. Nope. The boy returned to the drawer beside his bed and opened it. A vial rolled to the front with remnants of the blue potion dotting its insides. There's really nothing in it, Link said.
There's still some of it. I know you poured most of it on the masked salesman, but I feel like even a drop of his cure-all injury potion will come in handy.
It doesn't cure all injuries, Link replied gravely. Tattle wrinkled her brow.
Well, let's try to avoid getting stuck by lightning from here on out, shall we? Since that's what did the masked salesman in.
Agreed. He dropped the vial into his bag. As they left the Stockpot Inn, they passed Anju sitting behind her desk. She merely watched as they left, and Link almost walked outside without saying anything. But he did end up stopping. Tattle sighed irritably, but he ignored her. Thanks for letting us stay, Link said. Despite their awkward encounter at 4 in the morning, Anju let them rent the room. They'd found the same silver rupee to cover his clothes being cleaned and repaired, as well as all food and fresh water. They'd managed to sleep in a bed for a few hours too, which was another welcome reprieve. You're welcome, she said, smiling pleasantly, even though he already knew the secrets hidden behind her smile. But all those Anjus I got to know are dead. He shook his head free of those awful thoughts and entered East Clocktown. The square was far busier than it should have been. Carts, boxes, and wagons formed a line, filing out all at once into Termina Field rather than over the whole cycle. Where do they all go? Link wondered. He imagined the woods were the most common destination, as Snowhead was a treacherous mountain region and Ikana sounded even more dangerous. Some might go to Great Bay at first, but he knew the moon's approach would make those waves just as deadly. Link and Tattle were quick to find one stall near the back. They wriggled their way through the crowd and greeted the older shopkeeper. He frantically packed amidst the chaos of the other refugees, but he stopped when he noticed the boy and fairy. He gave them a weak smile. Toll finished, just as you asked. Measurements and everything. Thanks, Link said, pulling out a red rupee and laying it on the counter.
Are you sure this is a good idea?
Tattle asked as the shopkeeper bent to retrieve the clothing.
Don't you like having your hair nice and free? Won't you just lose this one too?
No, I miss it. A lot, actually. I might have to side with your fairy friend on this one, the old man said, holding the cloth out toward him. It's a little oddly shaped, but it's exactly as you asked. Link brought the green fabric into his hands. It was long and pointed, but the rim was wide enough for his head. The boy slipped it over his freshly cut hair. It felt more comfortable than ever, resting snugly over his ears. He closed his eyes, for a moment wondering if he'd open them to find himself in Hyrule. Reliving the masked salesman's life had made him miss those verdant hills sorely.
Yep,
Tattle said.
Congratulations! You look like a dweeb again.
Link opened his eyes to see Tattle smirking instead of his homeland. He returned her smile. Link did not need another home as long as he had her. Tattle flew out of the clock tower doors with Link beside her. The world was alive with busy, happy carpenters and merchants, unaware of the murders of Mayor Detour and his wife. As far as Clocktown residents were concerned, they were still alive and in their office.
Which I guess is true.
The fairy thought.
Everything else in that cycle is as dead as their mayor now.
The townsfolk were busy following their predestined first-day schedules after a successful Song of Time. Carpenters working, the Deku scrub flying overhead, the postman running by. She thought it would only take a few more cycles before she had every one of their movements memorized.
And how many cycles do we have left?
That question scared her. They'd learned a long time ago that the cycles weren't infinite. Now, they had only one region left, and she'd been looking forward to it least of all. She could count on one hand the number of times she'd been to the canyon. She did not want to return. Tattle looked down at the boy beside her. His blue eyes were squinted as he took in the sunny day, and his brow was furrowed. He looked bothered by something.
Are you okay, Link?
She asked.
Are you okay?
She repeated silently. What kind of a question was that? She was pretty sure she'd asked it at this exact moment before, too.
Of course he isn't okay.
Tattle thought of all the horrors he'd been through and now had seen through the masked salesman. Hearing about them had been bad enough, but living them? She'd wanted Link to humanize with that man long ago, ever since she'd been kidnapped. But reliving his past had not been the smart way to do it. Yeah, I'm okay, the boy said distantly. She hoped Link would come back to himself, rather than spending this cycle detached and distant, though Tattle also knew that was a lot to ask. Thankfully, the hero's smile returned when he touched his newly sewn hat for reassurance.
Yeah, good,
she thought, smiling herself.
Do you think we're good on the Re-Dead mask front now?
Tattle asked.
Our mysterious murderer must have lost it.
Let's hope so, Link said. I guess it's time for the Eastern Gate?
Yep,
Tattle replied, sighing.
I have to say, this part of the journey won't be fun. Well, not that any part of our journey has been fun, but there won't be a beautiful ocean or warm sand in Ikana.
She gulped, only vaguely remembering her and Tails' last visit years ago.
In fact, we might see full Re-Deads, not just their masks.
I've dealt with them before, Link said grimly. In Hyrule, they were always... He trailed off and Tattle followed his line of sight. A younger boy walked hastily toward the laundry pool staircase, keeping his head down. His purple hair came to his shoulders, and he wore a rather bold yellow mask, fashioned into a fox's pointed snout, whiskers, and squinted eyes. Have you ever noticed that kid before? Link asked, watching him walk up the steps. Tattle furrowed her brow.
I guess so. Why?
I'm just now realizing what he's doing. Link walked to follow the young boy's path, even as he already disappeared through the laundry pool alleyway. He was putting a letter in this particular postbox.
Is that a crime?
Tattle asked.
Are you sure we should be following this kid? I guess you're a kid too, but he seems a bit younger and...
Do you remember what you said to me on one of our first trips here? Link interrupted.
I hate it when he interrupts me,
she thought.
I'm sure I do, but enlighten me anyway.
Actually, I think that might have been the first, Tattle, Link said. Tattle rolled her eyes.
If you're trying to sell me on a crackpot theory, you're doing a really poor job buttering me up.
Link continued regardless. Tattle 1 and I met the postman when he was delivering a letter to Anju, and she pointed out how weird it was that letter deliveries had slowed down. You said letters were usually going around like crazy this time of year. So whoever sent that letter did it when there aren't many letters going around.
So you think this boy sent that letter to Anju?
I'm certain, Link said. I never thought about it until now. I've seen the postman pull a letter out of that postbox on this day before, and it has to be the one that boy put in. Tattle strained herself to remember why it was important until she recalled the details surrounding Anju's letter.
Kafei. You think the boy knows where Kafei is?
Assuming Kafei's alive, yes, Link said. He dared to follow the purple-haired boy up the stairs and into the alley.
You're still wanting to reunite him with Anju?
Of course, Link said. I promised. She remembered the moment sadly. Anju had been lying in the middle of the plaza, bleeding out from a wound caused by the Skull Kid.
That was the Anju we were closest with.
Link had promised that somehow, in some way, he would reunite her with Kafei.
Which isn't possible,
she realized, because that Anju was dead. A future Anju would have to do.
I suppose we are running out of time to accomplish that,
Tettle said.
If we want to fit it in with our whole saving the world agenda.
Link nodded as they rounded the corner into the laundry pool. They hadn't been back in many, many cycles, but it looked the same. The grassy area was just before them, ending at a stream. A pathway across the water ran from town wall to town wall as the whole pool was boxed in. The purple-haired boy crossed the wooden bridge running over the stream, passing a bell that dangled from a post.
Hey!
Link called out, stepping fully into the opening. The purple-haired boy turned around, freezing in apparent terror.
Can we talk?
He responded by sprinting. The stranger ran for the door at the end of the pathway. It was up against the town wall and led to the back of the curiosity shop.
Hey!
Link called out, running after him.
Wait up!
The boy did not, traveling quickly. Link had far more space to cover, and Tattle knew he wouldn't make it in time.
Stop!
Link said. Surprisingly, the purple-haired boy did, but Link hadn't even made it to the bridge. He could still bolt inside if he wanted to.
I need to ask you about Kafei!
Then the stranger swung the door open and slammed it shut behind him. Tattle wasn't surprised when Link completed the journey only to find the door locked.
Please open up! I'm trying to find Kafei!
I don't think that'll get us anywhere,
Tattle said, joining him across the stream.
He probably doesn't want you to find Kafei, even if he did send that letter, or else he wouldn't be hiding, running, and wearing a mask.
Link let out a sigh as he backed away from the door.
I guess so.
He turned to his fairy.
Maybe we deal with this after Ikana Canyon.
After?
Tattle asked, surprised.
Yes,
Link said, beginning to walk back the way they'd come.
That way we can save them the same cycle we stopped the moon.
He smiled, and Tattle was surprised to see just how much his face brightened at this new plan.
We can really save someone if we wait until then. No more does it really make a difference because of the moon. And it'll be Anju we save. Anju and Kafei.
I hope so.
Tattle thought grimly.
I really hope so.
Link stood tall, his boots loud as they crossed the wooden bridge.
Are you ready to free the last giant, Tattle?
You have no idea,
the fairy said.
I was about to go into temple withdrawal. It's been a whole day since the last one.
She paused.
I think?
This eastern gate staircase led into dirt and clay, bare of any grass. Termina Field was predominantly brown there, contrasting starkly with all lands before it. A brown, rocky road went straight ahead into brown, rocky cliffs. Dark stone pillars lined the initial pathway, which disappeared into the distant canyon walls. All that could be seen of the eastern world was a lone tower rivaling the clock tower's height, though it was far, far away. Link imagined many trials awaited them before they reached it.
Do you think that's the last temple?
Link asked. There was something foreboding about the dotted stone tower.
I have no idea.
Tattle said.
Of all the lands, I've avoided Ikana Canyon the most. For good reason. There always seemed to be fighting going on there. Or, at least it felt that way. It has a reputation for being a land of the undead type place. And as someone who's usually not superstitious...
She trailed off, but Link didn't need to ask more.
Should be loads of fun.
That's the spirit. No pun intended.
Link drew his ocarina from his belt and played a song. The notes were as beautiful as always, bringing the boy back to his days on Lon Lon Ranch. A neigh broke through his memories into the waking world, and Epona came running around the city wall's southern bend. Her legs were strong, and her face was content, happy to return to her master. Link smiled. Epona was always a reminder that it was possible for him to keep his promises. He ran to meet her. Epona nuzzled her head against his own as he petted her.
Hey, girl.
He scratched behind her ear, and if horses could smile, Epona's expression was the closest to it. Link and Tattle had made sure to play the Song of Time with Epona beside them, just outside South Clocktown's gate. He pulled himself onto his horse's back, situating himself into the saddle.
I guess we'd better get going,
he said, looking at the sun. The sky was still young, but with just under 72 hours, each moment was precious. The moon bared threateningly down on the city beneath.
Hopefully this will be the last time you get to destroy Termina,
he thought. If all went according to plan, after freeing the giant, they would play the Song of Time for a final cycle. At its end, they would reunite Anju and Kafei and confront Termina's doom at the top.
But when does anything ever go according to plan?
He remembered the pirate leader's arrow and the masked salesman stumbling into Georg's hole. Anju was dying again, skyborne after the imp's explosion. Link sprinted along the beach to save Tattle, watching as waves towered beside them. The fox-faced man held a knife, blood dripping onto the wooden floor.
No.
That last one wasn't his, at least. Ever since reading the masked salesman's mind, the memory's power had faded. They were still clear, but they slowly became someone else's, rather than his own.
Thankfully.
He wasn't sure he could handle the emotional burden of such a tragic past. That line of thinking prompted another thought. Link chose his words carefully as Epona trotted down the rocky pathway to Ikana Canyon. Tattle flew beside him as they journeyed leisurely. Stone pillars fell away on either side while the faraway cliffs drew closer.
Tattle?
Link asked.
Yeah.
Remember when we brought up what would happen after we saved Termina in Great Bay? Assuming we win.
There's nothing to assume, Link. We've come too far to give up or lose.
Link smiled.
Right, but what happened to the masked salesman's dad?
He paused, and his smile faded.
I can't bring you to Hyrule with me. You'd hardly last a week, and we already know what happens if I stay here much longer.
Tattle didn't reply. He watched her expression fall. This was a topic they'd both done their best to ignore.
This journey is already hard enough,
Link thought.
Why do the decisions afterwards have to be so hard, too?
Link added more.
I would say I could visit, but I think I need the piano to do that, and I'm not selling my name to a demon. It's possible my ocarina could work, but I'd have to stay sad and depressed my whole life to be allowed to come back. Termina doesn't let happy people inside.
He waited for her to say something, but she never did.
Tattle?
I don't know what you want me to say, Link.
The fairy said.
You're right. We'll have to go our separate ways after all this is said and done. Does that about sum it up?
No, that doesn't have to be what we choose. I could always stay.
But you turn into a shadow.
I'd forget who I was, but I'd be with you, he said. Forgetting all that pain and suffering, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, would it? I could forget my past, and in my mind, maybe my memories would change so that we were always together. Me, you, and Tail. We could live out our days here in bliss.
Even as he said it, though, he knew it felt wrong.
No.
Tattle said, gravely serious.
You can't do that. You can't just leave everything behind. Hyrule's still in danger, remember? You're their hero. You have to go back.
The prophet said the only thing that could stop Hyrule's destruction was Majora's Mask, and we know we can't bring it back. It would corrupt everything if we tried. We're going to destroy Majora, which means Hyrule will end. There will be a great flood, so there will be nothing for me to return to anyway. There's a very logical reason the masked salesman made all the choices he did.
Prophet Schmoffit, you're the hero of time. You'd find a way to save the world if you went back.
But what about Mortalitas' wall? All the things the masked salesman discovered. It all points to...
Look, maybe you were right in Great Bay.
Tattle interrupted.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about after until it's time. Destroying Majora's Mask seems to be a daunting enough task on its own.
Link eventually turned away and nodded.
You're right.
For a moment, Epona's hoofsteps were the only conversation.
Plus, we have the happy prospect of Undead City right before us.
Oh, brother.
She sighed.
Hopefully real Redeads aren't as terrifying as that mask.
The brown theme continued. High rock walls were always bordering them, reminding Link of Snowhead, but with none of the snow, grass, or beauty. More stone pillars had collapsed around them, telling only of ruin and defeat. The faces carved into them were no longer discernible, reduced to nothing but debris that blocked the way forward. The sun climbed the sky as Link rode on. For the longest time, there was nothing, just a long, winding road of clay. Epona's footsteps were rhythmic, and he was reminded of the time he dozed asleep in the forest.
I spy something brown,
Tattle said, breaking minutes of silence.
Very clever,
Link said. Epona buzzed her lips to express her boredom as well.
Do you remember Bubble Brain?
Link smiled, recalling the odd red glob with eye stems.
A true hero. A legend, even. I hope he's had a peaceful go of it on the cycle since.
You used him to carry your boots and shield because you were too weak as a Deku scrub. You wrapped your bag around his eyes like a leash.
The boy laughed.
That feels like it was so long ago.
He looked at the bag around his shoulder, bouncing against his right side with the movement of his horse.
This isn't even the same bag. My first one was destroyed when the moon fell.
Tuttle pursed her lips.
But if it's the same exact material used to make an identical bag, maybe it is the same one? You know, because time travel. Does it become a different bag just because the shopkeeper put the same scraps of leather together on a different morning out of 3 possible mornings?
Link balked.
Are you giving me a mathematics quiz right now?
I'd say philosophy.
You're sounding like the great Deku Tree. He never knew how to teach a lesson without hiding it behind a very convoluted question.
Philosophy is not your cup of tea?
Philosophy doesn't kill monsters.
I bet the great Deku Tree would disagree.
They kept following the flat road as it curved through Ikana's rocky walls. In Snowhead, there had been a continuous upward climb, and the cold, though lethal, had kept things interesting. In Great Bay, they'd had the ocean.
Maybe we'll run into a mysterious cloaked figure up the road to shake things up again,
Link said sarcastically.
He'll have a mask that's ridiculously overpowered and kidnap you. I'll go through the whole cycle looking for you, but I won't find you until the last 10 minutes. The cloaked figure will turn out to be a puppeteer pulling the strings the entire time, intertwined with my life in ways I could never have imagined. Sound about right?
Yes,
Tattle said, frowning.
that's exactly what's going to happen.
Further along the road, a bend revealed a long metal fence. It was gray.
Not brown!
Tattle exclaimed.
My favorite color!
I don't think not brown is a color.
It is now.
The fairy said, as Link stopped several feet from the fence. There was no gate in it, and it ran from wall to wall. The only way around it would be to jump, just like the one at Great Bay. He prepared Epona, petting her as he grabbed the reins. He snapped them forward, and his horse charged. It was no challenge. Epona easily passed over as Tattle flew to join him.
You know, your horse is pretty impressive,
Tattle said.
especially for one so young.
You should have seen her 7 years older,
Link said, pushing her onward. He looked around the towering walls, and once again the journey into brownness continued. He regarded the sun, which now hung at midday.
How far does the canyon go?
He asked.
I feel like we've been traveling for a really long time. The edge of Termina can't be that far away.
The castle of Ikana is very close to the edge, where I assume we're heading.
Castle?
Link inquired.
That tower we saw in the distance?
No, that's something else. I've never been there. But the castle of Ikana is right near the border. The gorge across from it is impassable, and you can't even see the other side because of the tall walls. I imagine it's just another field of ashes anyways.
Then we'll run the risk of repeating what happened in Woodfall and Snowhead,
Link said. Zelda had appeared to him, and he had chased her through the woods, only he'd become possessed. It had been his first time tapping into his scar's magic. He'd almost burnt the whole forest down.
And we both know what was in that snowhead cave. Even before I reached it, I saw her buried in the snow.
When you see her, you'll just have to ignore her,
the fairy said. Link knew Tattle had been forced through the snowhead cave before he'd met her, but he'd never asked her for specifics.
I don't need to.
He'd been through it himself, and he knew the horrors. A tall, impassable wall presented itself next. The pathway simply ended at it. The ledge at the cliff's top was unreachable, hiding what lay above from view. It looked like they'd need to somehow climb the sheer wall to keep going. Towering columns of rock continued atop the cliff, promising to guide them further. Link noticed that there was another way forward on their level, a pathway snaking to the left. The wall was not a complete dead end.
Oh no,
Tattle said.
What?
Link asking.
Can't we just go left?
Not if we're making for the castle. Left leads to the graveyard.
Tattle sighed, shaking her head in frustration.
Ah, I totally forgot about this part. Why couldn't the Skull Kid have turned you into a fairy?
I don't know,
Link said, slowing as they approached the formidable cliff underside. The boy noticed something else. A person. The speck was hard to make out from far away, but Link didn't halt his approach. He craned his head backward to look up, the cliff's tip blotting out the sun. The person was hooded, staring down at them with feet dangling over the edge. A wooden rod was in its hand, but instead of a fishing hook at its end, there was a lantern. The person's face was hidden in darkness, hiding all features with its cloak.
Do you think that's our hooded adversary?
Link asked.
You know, we should really stop making jokes about these things.
Tattle whispered back.
I think we're jinxing ourselves.
The person atop the cliff cackled at their presence. She was far too high up for them to pose a threat to her. She swayed her lantern as if hoping to catch a fish.
What are you doing in a place like this?
The old woman asked, sounding amused by the boy, horse, and fairy.
We're on vacation,
Tattle said, speaking loud enough for her voice to travel up the cliff.
My friend here doesn't like beaches. He prefers deep, blank canyons and long, flat roads. And brown, lots of brown. He hates the color not brown.
Link shot her a nasty look, and Tattle cleared her throat.
Will you let us through?
Oh, Ikana Hill beyond here is the place where spirits with troubles and lingering regrets wander, she responded. Even now, the spirits wander in search of one who can save them. It is unfortunate, but it is no place for one such as you.
Link noticed that her feet were bare, kicking them about like a child.
No place for us!
Tattle exclaimed.
Link here is Mr. Hero. He'll find a way to save all your spirits. He can't help himself. That's why we came down this way, actually.
If only I could believe such a claim,
she said, laughing again.
I can't let through everyone who claims to be a hero.
So people run up to your wall often and claim to be hopeless people pleasers?
That invisible man over there did.
The old lady pointed a pale finger at a ring of rocks near Link and Tattle. They looked, but saw nothing there.
I don't see anything,
Tattle replied.
He's invisible.
You're lying.
You're a fool.
Ah!
Tattle screamed, turning to her companion.
This freak is just as bad as Kotake!
I think old women just hate you,
Link replied. The fairy scoffed as the hero turned to address the stranger.
I really do intend to help,
he said, raising his voice.
I freed my homeland from an evil sorcerer and sealed him away in a temple. Only for a year, though.
He left that part out.
I'm known as the Hero of Time, and have already visited Woodfall, Snowhead, and Great Bay to free those places from equally dark curses.
The old woman considered his words, though her hood kept all facial expressions concealed. If you must enter, then you must find the mask containing wandering spirits. It's in the graveyard. Without that mask, you cannot save anyone's soul. Until then, I will not let you pass. Then she laughed, cackling madly and waving her stick around. Link looked up to Tattle. She opened her mouth to protest.
Tattle!
He interrupted.
Are you serious?
Let's just go to the graveyard.
You want to go on a little fetch quest for that old woman?
Fetch quests are my specialty. And besides, bad-mouthing her won't get us anywhere. Let's just listen.
Tattle glared back at the old woman.
Ah, you win,
She said.
Well, get your stupid mask.
Oh, I certainly hope so.
The old woman replied, still kicking her legs and waving her stick as Link, Tattle, and Epona followed the path to the left. The brown went on.
Why do old women hate me?
Tattle asked, appearing genuinely bothered by the prospect. Link ate bread he'd pulled from his bag as they talked.
I think you're right. Kotake and Comet both did, and now this old hag.
They're probably just jealous,
Link said. He knew his food would be stale by the third day, and he took in its freshness while he could.
The only thing they have over you is that they can open doors. That's good.
Tattle turned to him sharply.
I've been working on it,
She replied.
I almost opened the door to the knife chamber the other day, remember?
Link smiled.
I do remember. The doorknob was almost halfway there.
I'll be a professional door opener by the end of all this. Just wait.
I will. I'll work on becoming a professional demon slayer in the meantime.
Tattle laughed.
A door opener and a demon slayer? We'll be unstoppable.
She looked off, quietly musing to herself as Link chewed his bread.
Remember when you called your scar thing some sort of fierce deity?
I do,
Link replied.
Which one sounds cooler, fierce deity or demon slayer?
Neither. You're a dweeb. You'll always be fairy boy or Deku head.
To Link's surprise, they saw trees next. Brown gave way to green as tufts of grass grew to cover the dirt and clay. The canyon walls lowered too, eventually opening up to reveal a fenced area that promised more than wilderness. A path snaked between a handful of trees, passing through an opening in the gate. Link saw tombstones long before they went inside. They weren't very many, but they were massive. Gray, towering stone heads dotted the walkway cutting through the graveyard. The path continued through the expansive enclosure, snaking its way up a hill that defined the landscape. At the other end, another gate sealed off the way further into the canyon. There was a wooden shack in the far back too, its door as dark as its window. Link slowed Epona down as they entered. The sky was still vast and blue above them, yet somehow its light felt diminished in this land of the dead. He immediately spotted two intruders in the cemetery. They were both cloaked and hooded, across from the shack in the back. They wielded shovels and went to work clearing away dirt at the foot of a tombstone. Link and Tattle exchanged a glance before the boy slipped off his horse and pet Epona's nose.
Stay here, girl,
he whispered, walking carefully to the back. The hooded figures were working furiously in the sun. The dirt behind them had already formed a massive pile.
More hooded figures?
Tattle whispered.
The gods really do hate us.
Link drew his bow and stepped closer, suddenly realizing who they were.
I recognize those cloaks,
he thought. Link removed one of 20 arrows from his quiver, pulling it back against the elemental bow. One of the men heard the prepped weapon and spun around, whispering sharply at his brother to stop.
Who are you?
The other one yelled regardless. He did not drop his shovel, unlike his younger brother. The hole before them was already very deep, but they had yet to reach a body. Link kept his bow at the ready as he climbed the hill to reach them.
Someone who isn't fond of grave robbers,
Link said.
Lower your hoods.
The unarmed one did so immediately, but the bolder one nonchalantly tossed his head back to dehood himself, shovel still at the ready. Their faces were harsh, with matching handlebar mustaches and thinning hair. He knew the name of the younger one was Ingo, but he'd never learned the older brother's name.
Since when did Danpei hire bodyguards?
The older Gorman brother asked.
He doesn't,
Link said, his blue eyes hard. He watched as they took note of Tattle and Epona behind him. The hero remembered what had happened last time when he went easy on the older one. His ocarina had been kicked into a fire.
What are you two digging up?
None of your business,
the older brother said. Ingo tensed at his brother's harsh words.
I'd say it is my business. I have an arrow pointed at you.
Link summoned the cold calculus of the masked salesman, now seared into his memory, to help him in the confrontation.
Garrow's mask!
Ingo squeaked.
Well, a hood, really, but...
Shut up!
The older one shouted.
Get out of here!
Link said firmly. Now! He already knew what they planned to do with it. The Gorman brothers would dig it up, and later tonight, they'd summon a horde of ghosts to steal cows from Cremia.
And take her little sister, too.
It seemed he could finally prevent that catastrophe in more than one cycle.
We're not going anywhere,
the older brother snapped back.
Forlin, stop!
Ingo pleaded.
He'll kill us!
Forlin, the older Gorman brother, smiled.
He doesn't have it.
Link released the string, and the arrow traveled through Forlin's leg.
Ah, Dan!
He screamed, falling to the ground.
Forlin!
Go, Link said.
Now.
The younger brother scooped the older into his arms, who cursed. They returned swiftly to the graveyard's entrance, eyeing his horse as they did. When they turned back, however, they saw Link's unrelenting gaze and thought better of it.
Wow,
Tattle said.
Props to you for ramping up that hero's charm. Do you think they'll be back?
No, they won't. Link stowed his bow, turning back to the half-dug grave. The 2 shovels remained beside it, and the tombstone read Garo Lord with nothing else on it.
I'm pretty sure this is the mask that old woman wanted us to find.
That would be a little too easy,
Tattle said.
I'm skeptical. Nothing's ever offered to us on a silver platter.
She looked over her shoulder as if to search for the Gorman brothers.
I guess we finally know where they got their hood from. Makes sense. Anything having to do with ghosts and undead is probably here in Ikana.
And now they've just made our lives a lot easier, Link said. The grave's almost already dug up.
You want to keep digging after you just told them you hated grave robbers and kicked them out for doing it?
Link smiled.
If the alternative is waiting for me to grow wings.
Tattle nodded.
Fair point. I suppose we all need a little hypocrisy in our lives from time to time.
Before getting to work, Link took note of the back gate. It was tall and black, its top pointed and sealing off whatever lay beyond. An expansive arc of stone sat obscured on its other side, as if part of something bigger. There appeared to be a live, controlled fire coming from it.
A torch? Link thought. In the middle of the day?
The gate was chained shut, so they weren't meant to reach it. Likely, the graveyard's entrance had been chained too, before the Gorman brothers opened it.
Do you think whatever's on the other side is cooler than a hood granting you control over an army of ghosts?
I don't know,
Tattle said.
Better not to find out. Wandering around Ikana territory can be dangerous.
Let's hope digging up graves is a little safer. You should go get Epona and bring her over here while I get started in case...
Halt!
Link froze right before scooping out his first shovelful of dirt. The shack door was now open, and a familiar man stood outside. He had a shovel of his own over his shoulder, but he was much older than Link. His face was twisted and ugly, skin pale and teeth twisted. He was bald, and his clothes were simple and brown. He walked hunchback toward the boy and fairy.
Dampe!
The gravekeeper was the exact same as in Hyrule, tending to the graveyard behind Kakariko village.
Another shadow.
He'd heard the Gorman brothers mention his name, but he hadn't thought anything of it until now. Knowing the masked salesman's past seemed to have finally mended the memory block that had cursed him for so long. The old man stopped just before them.
I know what this looks like,
Tattle began. Link had a shovel in his hand, Tattle had one at her feet, and the grave was half dug up, a pile of dirt behind them.
Looks like you two are grave robbing me.
His voice was as harsh as his appearance.
Yep, that's exactly what I meant.
Tattle tensed, sighing as she went to speak again.
But the truth is, we were about to start grave robbing you. We haven't done it yet. We actually just chased off the first grave robber, so we were helping you.
She smiled, flashing her small white teeth, which sadly were obscured by her ball of light. Dampe didn't seem to buy it. He chewed something, unbothered that they could see his dirty teeth. Likely grass or some other drug.
A boy and a fairy scared them off?
A boy with weapons?
Tattle exclaimed.
Link, the demon slayer, fierce deity, and door opener, the hero of time and Kokiri child from Hyrule, first of his name.
Link wasn't amused. Dampe wasn't either. You're looking for treasure?
A hood,
Link said, stepping forward and deciding to be honest.
We're trying to go to Ikana Castle, but there's an old woman sitting on top of a cliff that won't let us pass until we have it.
A woman, eh? He laughed, dry and harsh with a cough at the end. You let a woman stop you? Link turned to Tattle, watching as the fairy strained herself not to explode on sight.
Do we have your leave to find it?
Link asked, ignoring the insult for now.
We weren't trying to exhume the body or anything.
Only if you promise to help me. He smiled, revealing his brown-stained teeth again.
With what?
I've been here for as long as I can remember, but I've been too scared to try something on my own. He began to explain, knocking the shovel against his head. I was scared I would fall in or thump my head while digging it out. But with help... He smiled again. I'm looking for the royal family's legendary treasure.
Royal family?
Link thought. He decided it couldn't be the same as Hyrule's, but the answer to that question didn't matter right now. It's buried here, in one of these graves, the gravekeeper said. If you help me find it, I'll let you keep the hood and go on your merry way. Link looked at Tattle, finding her skepticism.
Just threaten him and take the hood,
she would probably say. And he didn't blame her. Dompe was just as unsettling here as he was in Hyrule.
Fine,
Link said, choosing the path of least resistance.
Helping people. That's what got us this far. I'll do it.
I'll even split the treasure with you. I'm counting on you now. Even after the sun had set, they were still digging. Daytime faded in the graveyard, and soon only 2 lights remained. One hung from a dead, many-limbed tree in front of the shack, and the other was Tattle. She floated impatiently beside the gravekeeper. Epona picked at some carrots at her hooves beside the shack and tree. Sweat had soaked his tunic hours ago. His hands and arms were sore, and his back loathed being bent over for so long. The dirt continued growing behind him and diminishing before him. This was the 4th grave they dug up. The first had yielded the hood, which was now stored in his bag. None of the other 3, however, had shown any signs of royal treasure, including this one. The other 2 had simply turned up coffins containing skeletons. This one was likely to do the same. Dompe dug a 5th grave by himself. He grunted like an ape with each stroke, a waterfall of sweat compared to the boy. They'd taken several breaks, and the old man had even provided Link and Tattle dinner. But now, the fool's errand was growing ridiculous.
We can't waste any more time here,
Link thought. After this grave, he would have to tell Dompe he quit. Tattle flew beside Link's ear, but Link didn't stop digging.
This guy's the worst gravekeeper ever,
Tattle whispered. Dompe didn't appear to hear, absorbed in his task far away.
What kind of graveyard owner digs up his own graves for treasure?
This one, apparently,
Link said, out of breath. He'd almost turned into a Goron to help ease the process, but he didn't feel like dealing with Dompe's reaction.
Don't fly so far away, fairy,
Dompe spat.
I need your light.
The fairy sighed.
We need to leave, Link.
She flew over to the old man's hole, once again illuminating it. Link mouthed, I know, to her in return, but continued digging nonetheless.
One last coffin,
Link thought. Twilight faded to night as their shovels kept busy. Their digging wasn't interrupted, however, until Dompe screamed. Link instantly dropped his shovel and spun around. Dompe had tumbled into the mostly dug-up grave, but he kept screaming, even after he'd fallen. Link could still see him since the hole was shallow. A bloody arrow protruded from his stomach. The hero had already notched a retaliation before the attackers could strike again. 2 hooded figures stood at the graveyard entrance. One held a pitchfork, and the other had a longbow, a second arrow drawn. The red gem on Link's bow glowed brightly, and fire was born at its tip. The heat was intense on Link's face as he was bathed in crimson light. Tattle flew behind Link and his pointed arrow.
Loose again, and I'll kill your brother,
Link yelled. His fire arrow was pointed at the one holding the spear, which he knew was Ingo. Forlin didn't lower his bow.
It's 2-1!
Forlin dared.
Help me! I've been shot!
Link ignored Dampe's pleas, focused on the brothers across from him.
But you both want to get out of here alive.
Forlin released his arrow. Link gasped, releasing his own string in response. His first thought was that he'd made the same mistake as with the veil, but the arrow zoomed by Link's head just barely. Link's shot caused him to miss too, but the fire arrow illuminated why Forlin had missed. The Gorman brother was looking at his foot, kicking something away that had grabbed his ankle. A hand. Link's eyes widened in understanding.
What is that?
He heard Ingo yell. Link turned to the open grave when Dampe's screams devolved into mindless terror. His old, harsh voice quickly gurgled with death as terrible ripping noises echoed from what had just become his final resting place. Then, the ground ripped open in front of Link too, and skeletal fingers broke free into the young knight. Link turned uncertainly toward the graveyard entrance, but the Gorman brothers were blocking it. He barely had time to strategize as fleshless bodies drugged themselves into the late night to overwhelm the Gorman brothers. Arrows and pitchforks hardly did them any good as their screams turned red beneath the dark blue sky.
Run!
The fairy's warning was hardly needed. Link spun away from the entrance, finding the locked gate in the back. He sprinted in its direction, cut short when thin white fingers of bone clutched his ankle. He fell on his stomach as the monster pulled him. A skull was next to the push against the dirt, its eye sockets filled with a glowing orange light. Mud and worms clung to the pale yellow of its skull, its teeth brown and dripping with soil. Its ancient hinges opened to snap at his foot as the rest of the beast continued to rise. Another arm shot out to grab Link's right shoulder as the hero struggled to stand.
Stall children!
Link managed to grab his sword and severed the bony forearm in half. As his first attacker fell away, Link turned to the second and plunged his golden blade through the just-emerging chest cavity. The brittle bone broke easily, and the skeleton fell apart when he sliced his sword through the skull. Its orange lights went out as the bones became lifeless again. Link jumped to his feet and saw that stall children had popped up everywhere. Dampe's grave was far away, but his screams had ended long ago. The Gorman brothers had fared no better, now hidden corpses beneath an army of bone. The stall children's claws were sharp, their eyes were bright, and their thirst for blood was strong. The small, fierce skeletons continued to hack away at the already dead man, but that didn't stop the undead from walking toward Link, arms outstretched to tear at his flesh. Tattle was just behind him.
We have to get to the other gate,
she said.
Maybe they can't get to the other side. Maybe that's why Dampe had it sealed off.
Link hacked at the nearest stall child, reaching for him. One clean slice ended its afterlife, and he spun around, dodging another's grasp as he ran to the locked gate. It wouldn't be a long run, but something else caught his attention. Epona. His horse was cornered against the fence's far wall, neighing frightfully as monsters boxed her in. She crashed down on one of the stall children near her, and it broke apart easily. But there were more, and the swarm around her formed a crowd. Link's face narrowed itself in determination.
No, not my horse!
He slid his sword into his scabbard and charged into the crowd of stall children. They continued to rise from underground and claw their way out of the dirt, eyes shining in the darkening world. Link removed his Goron mask and was soon barrel-rolling through the skeletons. His sleek, hard Goron back was rock, and it rolled through the undead children mercilessly. Their bones snapped underneath his weight, and he sped to the side of his horse. Link jumped free from his ball and applied the Zora mask next, now holding Darmani's face in his light green, rubbery fingers as he returned it to his side. His sharp fins came out next as he stood between the undead and his horse. The projectiles cut easily through the stall children, snuffing out even more of the orange eyes. Link removed the Zora mask next and returned both face pieces to his bag. He jumped atop his fearful horse, removing his sword as he hacked the head off the last stall child, threatening them. The skull spiraled skyward, trailing no blood as the undead died. He snapped the reins down hard, and Epona charged for the gate. Stall children tried desperately to stop them, chasing after or reaching out from the ground for the horse's legs. The tall, black gate, its bars pointed, was before them, the chains as taut and formidable as ever. Tattle hovered over it nervously, watching the approaching boy with the army of skeletons behind him.
Come on, girl. You can do it. I know you can.
He slid his sword away and grabbed the saddle with both hands. The gate was far taller than anything she'd jumped before.
I believe in you, Epona.
Her strong legs closed the remaining distance as the stall children were loud behind them. Shattering teeth and exploding dirt filled the graveyard with sounds of a great battle. Claws grazed the back of Epona's legs as the moment came. Link held his breath as the black bars became his only reality. Epona leapt. For a moment, Link was weightless, suspended in the cool air. He could see the fire atop the archway on the other side. The flames formed a ring with something hidden in their center. Orange, red, and yellow danced brilliantly as they licked the sky. Epona's hooves scraped the gate's spikes, but she passed over. Her legs gave out when she landed, crashing onto her side. Link rolled onto the grass next, spinning several times before he came to a stop. He looked up momentarily, horrified. However, Epona was already standing, buzzing her lips and neighing in frustration. He ran to her side to check for injuries, rubbing her nose and neck.
Good girl, good girl! I'm so proud of you!
He held her close to his face, nuzzling against her coat as Tattle flew to join him. The three of them turned to look at the locked gate. The stall children savagely tore at the bars, their sharp claws scraping at the air between them. Their eyes shone angrily, but they were unable to slip through. The metal gateway held,